Vice Chairman of the Kentucky Public Service Commission, Mary Ann Butler, Commissioner of the Kentucky Public Service Commission, John Lyons, Deputy Secretary of the Energy and Environment Cabinet, serving as proxy for Secretary Rebecca Goodman, Charlie Rowland, Executive Advisor with the Cabinet for Economic Development, serving as proxy for Interim Secretary Larry Hayes, Breckinridge County Judge Executive Maurice Lucas, and Patrick Henderson, ad hoc appointee. At this time, I would caution attendees to please set your cellular phones to silent mode or turn them off. Also, due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the Siting Board is hosting this hearing via video conferencing. In addition to normal courtesies regarding cell phones, these tips may help with clarity and avoid feedback. Please mute your microphone if you are not speaking. Attorneys, when interjecting, please state your name so the record is clear. If you use a phone for the audio and computer for video, please turn the computer audio off. If you are in a room with several people on their own computers, please turn off the audio for all but one computer. If another participant is nearby, even in a next-door office, close the doors between the offices. Use wired headphones or wired earbuds for better sound quality, and preference is given to these types of hearing devices because wireless devices may lose power. Please keep a charger nearby in case your batteries run low. And finally, and most importantly, please alert the Siting Board if you are experiencing technology failure that prevents your participation at any time in the proceedings. Attorneys should contact staff at the previously provided contact information. The hearing today is for the purpose of taking evidence on Green River Solar LLC's application for a certificate of construction for a 200 megawatt merchant electric generating solar facility to be located in Breckinridge and Meade counties. At this time, we'll have entry of appearance of counsel. Given the unique issues of doing a video hearing, I'd ask, as counsel identifies themselves, that they also identify their witnesses. For the applicant.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. David Samford with the law firm of Goss Samford PLLC on behalf of Green River Solar. With me today is Ms. Lena Jensen, Mr. Brian Bartles, Mr. Matt Towery, Mr. Chris Mason, and Mr. Joshua Crawford.
Okay. And for the Siting Board staff.
Jennifer Fell.
Okay. And I've been advised that public notice has been given and filed into the record. Is that correct, Mr. Samford?
Yes, Your Honor. It was filed into the record on October 25th.
All right. And I also would like to note and say thank you, Mr. Samford, for your diligence in following the regulations and providing us a witness list a number of days prior to the hearing. I appreciate that. My understanding, Mr. Samford, is that there's the only outstanding petitions or motions is one for confidentiality. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And the setback as it relates to Breckinridge County was not done by petition. It's in the application prayer for relief. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Ms. Fell, at this time we ordinarily do public comments. Has anybody signed up to provide public comments in this matter?
None, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. I just would like to remind anybody that is either watching this live or watches a tape of this, I'm dating myself a bit, who watches a recording of this on the internet, that you can provide public comment on this case at any time prior to submittal on the record. In order to do so, instructions to do so can be found at psc.ky.gov. You can send public comments by email to the Public Service Commission at psc.info@ky.gov or psced@ky.gov. We just ask that you include your name, address, and the case number, which in this matter is 2020-00387. Before starting, Mr. Samford, I'm going to take the opportunity, especially for our two ad hoc members, to explain what the process we're going to follow today is. Counsel for the applicant will tender their witness, introduce their witness, tender their witness for direct examination, tender them for cross-examination, in which all 7 of the Siting Board members will have an opportunity to ask pertinent questions. The order will go in is Deputy Secretary Lyons, Mr. Rowland, Judge Lucas, Mr. Henderson, and then the 3 PSC commissioners before turning it back over, the witness back over to Mr. Samford for redirect. Mr. Samford, before we start with the witnesses, do you have anything that you need to bring in front of the Siding Board?
No, Your Honor, we're ready to proceed.
Okay. Make sure. I don't think I have anything else either, Mr. Sanford, so you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We'd like to call Miss Lena Jensen, please.
All right, Ms. Jensen, please turn on your microphone and camera and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Lena Jensen at 700 Universe Boulevard, Juno Beach, Florida, 33418.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Jensen. Mr. Sanford, you may ask.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Miss Jensen. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. Would you mind, let's just start out with just basic information. Would you please state your title for the record, please?
Yes, my title is Project Director.
Okay, and you're the project director for the Green River Solar Project?
Correct.
Okay. Before we get into some of the preliminaries on the application and things like that, why don't you just tell the Siding Board a little bit about your professional background and experience?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. So my background, I've spent 12 years in the energy industry working on large-scale energy projects. So from early economic modeling and planning all the way through to commissioning and startup. The majority of my experience has been in oil and gas, working in projects around the world and within the U.S. as well, the Gulf of Mexico and the Permian Basin. And then recently switched to renewables. So I've worked on utility scale solar projects in Arkansas and Kentucky.
Thank you for that. And could you just give us maybe a sense of magnitude for the total amount of investment perhaps in the types of projects you've worked on?
Yeah, so in my past role, worked on projects that were, represented billions of dollars of investment, across the globe. So, I mean, to add it all up, probably, 20 or $30 billion of investment that I was involved with.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the application. You were involved in the preparation of the application, correct?
Correct, yes.
And did you cause certain responses to data requests to be filed in the record of this proceeding?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or edits or corrections to either the application or the data request responses that you sponsored?
We don't have any major changes. As you know, we are constantly optimizing our site layout. Recently, we've been working with one of our landowners, and they brought up, and we worked with them to look at a certain spot on their land that they wanted to put solar arrays on. And so there's a portion of that land, probably up to 10 acres or so, that in the latest version that we've submitted to the State Siding Board shows us avoiding an area that has an older building and an older home. And the landowner has decided to raise that home and will be putting solar panels on that. It's a minor change to the overall site plan, but I just wanted to bring that up.
And would you by chance be able to refer us what map in the site plan that property would be located in?
Yes, yeah, if you look at the site plans, it's on sheet C2.02.
And did I hear you say that would help optimize the project even further?
Right, yep. So it would bring more panels closer in to where we're injecting the energy into the grid.
Okay. So with that one edit to the site plan, if I were to go back and ask you all of the same information and questions that were in the application and in your responses to data requests that you sponsored, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Is it your desire and intent to have the application and your responses to data requests incorporated into the record of this hearing?
Yes.
Did you by chance have any materials, or do you by chance have any materials that you have with you as we go through this virtual hearing?
Just on my computer. Hold up. The
Okay.
same materials that have already been submitted.
Okay. So it's basically the case record of the case.
Correct.
Okay. Your Honor, with that, I would tender the witness for cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Ms. Jensen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. If at any time you can't hear me well or don't understand the question I'm asking, please just let me know. I'll try to rephrase it for you. Also, if there's any questions I ask of you that need to be deferred to one of the other witnesses, please just let me know that as well, and we'll make sure to ask them. First, what you've just been telling the citing board relating to the site plan, there were several versions of the site plan referred to throughout the proceeding, even before today, learning of this new information. Can you confirm which version was actually presented to the Meade County Planning Commission? It looks like there was a concept plan, June 25th of 2021. There's one that was titled Kentucky Siting Board, July 9th, 2021. One titled Meade County Plan, July 13th, 2021. And then Meade County Plan Resubmittal, August 11th, 2021.
So there's actually one that was submitted October 15th, if I'm correct. So we recently, the Meade County also requires us to submit a conditional use permit application. And we have yet to have those public hearings, but that was submitted October 15th, October 18th. October 18th, that was submitted. And that site plan will reflect the latest version that was sent to the Kentucky State Siting Board in the Green River case. And then it also reflects what I was just referring to, where that one section where we'll be raising those buildings and putting solar panels over those acres.
Okay. Council, as a post-hearing data request, I would request a copy of that newest site plan. As Ms. Jensen just stated, had been provided to the Planning Commission, to the Meade County Planning Commission. As far as this new addition of panels and area on the site plan, since we don't have that map in front of us, can you explain if there's any other substantial changes to the site plan, such as vegetative buffering, or if it will impact any of the setbacks, if there's any issues there?
It won't impact any additional vegetative buffering or setbacks. It was really internal to one of the parcels that we were optimizing.
Okay. Will there be any change to the landowner agreement with that landowner as a result of that?
No, there will be no changes to the landowner agreement.
Okay, thank you. And can you confirm whether or not the solar array racking system design has been decided yet?
We haven't made the final decision on that. That final decision will be made when we start into the more detailed design phase of the project of execution.
Okay. One option that Green River Solar has presented is a tracking system that would allow the panels to rotate or track with the sun, and that would use motors, correct?
That would use motors, yes.
Okay, and can you confirm whether or not the use of those tracking motors for the solar array was included in the noise impact assessment report that was included along with the site assessment report?
The noise impact assessment doesn't include any noise from those motors.
And as tracking motors will essentially produce sound during normal operations of the facility, what is Green River Solar's position on the level of sound that might be produced using that system?
That's something that we can come back to you with some data on that. My experience with others has been that it's a very minimal sound, and the analysis that has been done already probably covers it, but we can confirm that and come back to you.
Are you aware of whether or not it would substantially alter the levels of sound that is provided in the site assessment report?
My initial feedback is that it wouldn't, but we would need to go back and do that analysis in more detail.
And then in Green River Solar's response to the siting board consultant's report, an alternate racking system was presented. And it states it's referred to as ground mounting, and it is like the fixed tilt design and that the angle of the solar panels will not change. However, it also has a lower profile than either of the other two designs, and it is fixed to the ground via a ballast system or a ground screw system. Just curious if you could give us any further detail on that system and really whether it's a viable option or the better option in your opinion at this point, given the presence of the karst and sinkholes in the area?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we're considering that is because of the karst geology in the area. And we think that this ground-mounted option, while we still need to do a significant amount of work to establish the feasibility of it in the area, we wanted to include it as a potential option, as we move forward in the design. So further details, our engineering and construction expert, Matt Towery, could speak to those.
Okay. And would Mr. Tower be the one to speak to as to the actual process of installing those, and how it differs from regular pile driving processes?
Yes.
Speaking of karst, there's a high concentration of karst on the site proposed for this project. There's been public concern and comment about installing this project in such an area with sinkholes and an extensive cave and aquifer system underground. In Green River Solar's response to staff's first request for information, it states that the designs for the project would ultimately be prepared with geotechnical experts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And are there any final designs that have been prepared by a geotechnical expert at this point?
Our designs aren't final at this point. We're still haven't started the detailed engineering design of that, but we have done quite a bit of work in the field to delineate where the different sinkholes and their levels of risk are across the site. And Mr. Matt Towery could certainly speak more to the details on that. But our design will fully incorporate the feedback that we're getting from these geotechnical experts. And they've gone out and looked at all the mapped, publicly available data on that karst, but also they've looked at the land and using their own expertise, delineated additional risks that we would incorporate into the design.
Okay. And just to your knowledge, can you explain any of those additional risks that you have already been made aware of?
Yeah. Yes. So there are, as you say, there is karst geology there. There are sinkholes. One of the things that the technical experts have done is to delineate, the exact edge of those, and part of that incorporation into the design is to stay, within a certain buffer away from any sinkholes that are considered high or moderate risk. And then we've also received feedback from these geotechnical consultants on potentially building over and remediating some of the lower risk sinkholes as well.
Okay, thank you. First, about locating the exact perimeter of the sinkholes, and you mentioned that you may come up with a potential setback. Have you come up with a proposed setback from those identified sinkholes at this point?
Our design that we're working with is assuming a 25-foot setback from those sinkholes.
And I believe you mentioned that that was for high risk or moderate risk sinkholes. Can you
Correct.
tell us what the difference is, how they determine, this may be again for Mr. Towery or someone else, how they
Yeah.
determine what the high risk, moderate risk, or low risk sinkholes, how they're identifying those?
Yeah, I mean, they look at a lot of signs around the sinkhole, and I'll let Mr. Towery speak to this more, but it's really trying to get at the question of whether the sinkhole is dormant or whether they can think that it's potential to grow.
Okay. And then you had also stated about the possibility of remediating or building over some of those, what have been determined to be low-risk sinkholes. Can you explain this process, or should I speak to Mr. Towery on that as well?
That's a good question for Mr. Towery. At a high level, we would, put in remediation that would act similar to the ground surrounding it. So it would act as a filter.
Okay. I'll speak to Mr. Towery on that a little bit later. And then you may know this, Green River Solar has talked about potential silt fences, sediment basins, sediment traps, or buffer zones that would be deployed around, quote, sensitive resources, which I'm assuming to mean these sinkholes. Can you confirm whether that applies to all of the existing or known sinkholes on the proposed site?
It would, we would work in consultation with geotechnical consultants and, our civil engineers to put together what that soil erosion, or that like the stormwater protection plan would look like, including the silt fences. I think that, we would certainly incorporate all of that feedback from those engineers into our plans. And that would include, not buffering, but, silt fencing and protection around those more sensitive karst areas.
And are you aware of whether Green River Solar has any contingency plan yet for sinkholes that might occur that have been previously unknown, where solar equipment has been installed? And I'll follow that up, let you know, there's been public comment regarding concern over any hazardous material that could potentially fall into the cave system or water aquifer system and affect the water supply in the area.
I see. So the question, can you just repeat the overall question? then?
Basically, does Green River Solar have any contingency plan in the event that there was a previously unknown area, a sinkhole occurs where solar equipment had been installed?
Yeah, okay. I understand the question. So there's two parts to that. The first one is what we've already been talking about. So, we've had geotechnical experts not only delineate where sinkholes are already there, but any depressions or features that might look like they might open up and become an issue. So the first prong in that approach really is identification and avoidance where there's higher risk. The second one, regarding what happens if during operation something opens up that we didn't previously identify, that's something that we would be monitoring that. We have a 24/7 operations team that monitors these sites, and they would be able to see if any these sinkholes as they're opening up, or if there's any issues. Regarding the solar panels themselves, there's no hazardous material in those solar panels. It's inert and doesn't doesn't really pose any environmental risk. And even if, they were to break, a lot of them, when they break, they still remain intact. So there's very, very low risk of anything from the solar panels ever getting into, groundwater or into an open throat, because these sinkholes usually, grow slowly, and it's something that would be monitored regularly.
Okay, and you mentioned this monitoring, someone would be monitoring it 24/7. Who does that? Who performs that monitoring?
So we have a center in our headquarters that will monitor, around the clock our solar facilities. And so when something were to happen, if one of the solar arrays or the strings were to, go offline or something like that, it would be a warning sign for them the next day, or if it happens overnight, and they would be able to send people out, the people that are actually on site maintaining the facility.
Okay, thank you. There is a Meade County local ordinance that provides for setbacks and some additional protections regarding a decommissioning plan being submitted for review, again for Meade County, but there's no such ordinance that exists for Breckenridge County, correct?
Correct.
And I believe it's been stated in the record, but can you confirm that Green River Solar has committed to adopt the terms of the Meade County ordinance for the entirety of the project, including the respective areas in Breckenridge County?
Yes, the project has requested to adopt the setbacks that are in the Meade County ordinance for use within the portion of the plant that is in Breckenridge County as well. Okay.
And has anything ever been created in writing with Breckenridge County or their officials to memorialize that commitment?
We haven't, the interactions we've had so far with Breckenridge County have been very positive. Everyone has been, great to work with, and we've really enjoyed working with all of them. We've had a chance to talk with the fiscal court in the past, and we've had a chance to work with the economic development team. Within all those interactions, it was determined that, a site plan approval and these kind of permitting requirements were not required. And so we don't have that written down in a letter, but it was the, known case that these permits are not required within Breckenridge County.
Okay. And just to confirm, the applicable setbacks that are provided in the Meade County ordinance is 50 feet from the perimeter of the property line and 250-foot setback from any residential structure, nursing home, church, or school. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. But as stated in the application, it states interconnection facilities may, however, be located within the setback lines as consistent with the zoning ordinance. Can you explain what facilities are being referenced that might be located within those setback lines?
We currently don't have any plans to put our interconnection facilities within those setbacks. Our interconnection facilities are adjacent to the existing substation, where we will, at the corners of 428 and 79, and our interconnection facilities will be directly adjacent to those.
Okay. And previously, when we were speaking about applying the same setbacks that are present in the Meade County ordinance to any parcels that are in Breckenridge County, is Green River Solar committing to apply all of the terms and conditions of the Meade County Solar Ordinance, or just the setbacks?
We're committing to apply the setbacks the same as Meade County and Breckenridge County.
Okay. I know it's been...
As well as the vegetative buffer. So our site plans will also reflect the vegetative buffers.
And during Green River Solar's meeting with Meade County Planning and Zoning Commission, in order to approve the project, there were some public comments made. Several were in opposition to the project, and one of those comments voiced concern with compliance with setbacks, and it was in regards to Kentucky 79. Apparently, there's some road work that is planned for the future to eliminate some curves on that road. And in Green River's responses to staff's second request for information, it stated that though the project has been in the 6-year road plan since 2012, the current plan calls for construction beginning in 2024, that the project is not expected to have a meaningful impact on the solar project site plan, as it will take place at the end or after construction of the solar project, and that Green River Solar would continue to coordinate with the Transportation Cabinet. I'm just curious if Green River Solar is aware of the actual locations where the road will be straightened.
I think that those plans are still being finalized. We have made initial contact with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and we'll continue to coordinate and work with them, as we finalize our designs. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering how that would affect the distance between the roadway and the equipment that would be already installed if that highway project was not put in place until after the solar equipment was installed, if Green River believes it would still be in compliance with the setback requirements.
Right, and we'll still need to coordinate that with the Transportation Cabinet to understand where those locations may be.
Okay. And are you aware as to whether Green River Solar has entered into any purchase power agreement with any entity at this time?
Yes, the Green River Solar Project has entered into a power purchase agreement.
Okay. And without getting into the specifics of it, is there any issue, or are you aware of when that purchase power agreement expires?
It's public. No, it's a 20-year contract.
Okay. Okay, now we're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about noise concerns. In response to the Siting Board Consultants Report, Green River acknowledges the limitation of work hours from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday that has been placed on previous projects reviewed by the Siting Board. However, Green River Solar proposes construction hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you confirm if that applies to all days of the week, including Sundays?
It does apply to all days of the week.
Okay. And as an alternative, Green River Solar has proposed that it might limit higher noise construction activities, such as pile driving, to occur from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Would that also include Sundays?
Yes.
Can you explain what Green River Solar considers to be low noise construction activities versus that alternative presented of higher noise activities?
Yeah, so for example, early in the morning when people are doing safety orientations or, job safety analysis and things like this, getting everyone ready in the morning, that would be low noise activity. Or another example might be commissioning, when you're testing that, all the wires are properly installed and connected. So those would be some examples of some low noise activities that could be done.
Okay. What about what are the higher noise activities that are proposed for that shorter time frame of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.?
This would likely include pile driving, as an example.
Okay. Green River Solar also acknowledges in the same response to consultants' report that the Siting Board typically requires the implementation of a construction method to suppress the noise from the pile driving process. And in further down in the response, they've stated that Green River Solar project representatives were not able to obtain reliable cost estimates from EPC contractors regarding these mitigations, and that the feasibility and applicability of these noise mitigations in the industry is not well established. That Green River Solar respectfully states the project setback requirements and create an open communication channel with nearby residents and businesses as a sufficient mitigation for noise. As a post-hearing data request, council, we would ask that Green River Solar provide the written responses received from EPC contractors regarding those noise suppression methods. And then Ms. Jensen, are you aware as to whether Green River Solar requested cost estimates from any other contractors?
We have not.
Okay. What is NextEra's experience with the construction noise suppression methods stated in the consultant's report? Basically, whether or not you've implemented any such method in any other project.
Are you asking, across NextEra Energy Resources, across the?
Yes, as the developer of the project, just asking if you have implemented any of these methods, the semi-tractor and canvas method, or the sound blankets on the permanent fencing surrounding the site, or also temporary fencing surrounding the immediate pile driving area, or any other comparable method.
I'm not directly familiar with the use of any of those methods, but it's probably a better question for Mr. Towery.
As far as traffic concerns, Green River Solar had stated that any road weight ratings and road shoulder damage mitigation measures would be discussed with the counties. Has Green River Solar been in any discussions with either Meade or Breckenridge County regarding such ratings or mitigation measures?
We haven't had those detailed discussions yet with the transportation teams at either county.
Okay. And has Green River Solar discussed the potential of any bonding with the respective counties for potential damage to the roads?
From our previous discussions, there weren't any requirements regarding road use agreements or road bonding at this time.
Okay. As far as the economic impact of the proposed project, in its application, Green River Solar has stated that it would be seeking a payment in lieu of taxes or pilot agreement with both Meade and Breckenridge counties. Are you aware as to whether or not any pilot agreements have been entered with either county?
We haven't entered into any pilot agreements yet. It's something the project will eventually seek.
Okay, so that's not in process at all at this point in time?
It's not. We haven't initiated those conversations yet.
Are you aware as to when Green River Solar will be initiating that?
It will likely be by the end of this year. We'll start those conversations.
As far as decommissioning plans for the project, in response to the consultant's report, Green River Solar states, basically, again, reiterating that the proposed setback requirements in the Meade County ordinance would apply to Breckenridge County as well. And then it further states that Green River Solar is willing to provide the Breckenridge County Fiscal Court with a copy of its decommissioning plan for informational purposes. However, they previously clarified and confirmed that permits and approvals are not required outside of city limits. And it also discusses that the landowner agreements provide for financial security to cover the cost of any future abandonment. Just like to know if you can confirm whether the decommissioning plan would provide for surety that would name Meade and Breckenridge counties respectively as beneficiaries. If that's part of the current decommissioning plan.
The decommissioning plan that was submitted with Meade County covered the scope of the project that was within Meade County. And per the, as you say, per the Meade County ordinance, that decommissioning bond is required to be posted in the name of Meade County. For the scope of the project that is in Breckenridge County, we also have these decommissioning bonds, this decommissioning bond language embedded within our landowner agreements. So within the scope of the landowner agreements, those bonds are required.
Okay. I know that the landowner agreements were filed confidentially into the record of this case. Since that filing, have any other landowner agreements been reached that have not been filed into the record?
No.
Okay. Okay, and it also looks like, speaking of the landowner agreements and the decommissioning obligations, it states that the project landowner agreements in Breckenridge County include requirements to provide financial security to cover the cost of any future abandonment of the facility, net of salvage value. Timing for this security is required not later than 15 years after the facility has begun operations and will be reevaluated every 5 years. Is Green River Solar familiar with Siting Board's recent decisions that have required the surety to be in place at the time of commencement of a project?
Can you repeat who that requirement was coming from again? I don't think I caught that.
It was in response to the consultant's report, is where Green River's statement regarding that the security would be required not later than 15 years after the facility has begun operations. And I was just wondering if Green River Solar was aware of the recent Siting Board direction that typically requires surety is in place at the time of the commencement of the solar facility.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying, are we aware of the state Siting Board's position on it? Is that the question?
Yes, on the actual filing of the surety.
Oh, I was not aware of that.
Okay. I think that is actually all the questions staff have for Ms. Jensen at this time.
Deputy Secretary Lyons, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Ms. Jensen. I may have some questions actually that you may want to defer to others on, but I'll ask you first and see where we go with that. And I tried to look through all the requests for information and the responses from the solar company so I don't repeat questions that have already been asked and or answered. But I was interested in that part of this site was originally, I don't own, maybe not the right word, but maybe the lease agreements with Merino Solar. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
So have all transactions over to Green River taken place at this time, and Merino is no longer an entity that's involved in this project in any way?
Right now, the structure is that the Merino Solar was the solar project set up by the developer, the original developer on this project that we purchased the project from. So right now, the way the structure is set up is Merino Solar still exists as an LLC, and then Green River Solar owns 100% of Merino Solar. So
Did that take, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the agreements that are in the name of Merino Solar are owned also by the higher level of Green River Solar LLC.
Okay, so are the lease agreements with Green River or are some of those with Merino?
They're with Merino Solar.
Okay.
And then the full Merino Solar was purchased by Green River Solar.
Is that done prior to any filing with the commission or sometime afterwards?
It was done prior to.
Okay, all right, thank you. Also read with interest, well, I didn't read all of them, but 31 pages of public comments that you all included in your application through social media. I don't know that I've ever seen another developer submit something like that. I was also interested in how you categorized some of the sentiments as being neutral. I kind of read them in a different light, but that aside, are you all continuing, well, and given that there's no public participation here today, there was quite a bit of interaction via that social media platform. Are you all continuing to interact with the community on that, in that manner?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I think that's worth noting, given some of the sentiments there. Let's see. I did want to follow up on a line of questioning that Ms. Fell was asking regarding and she may have asked this, and if she did, I apologize. But with the commitment by Green River to implement the Meade County ordinance the same way in Breckenridge, has that been discussed, or was that discussed with Breckenridge officials? And if so, was there any reaction on their behalf regarding implementation of the Meade County setbacks in particular?
Right. At the time of those discussions, I wasn't the developer on the project, but I had some conversations with those who were involved. And from what I've learned from my colleagues, that those conversations around the setback did occur. And I think it may have, from what I understand, it was part of a fiscal court discussion earlier this year, and the feedback was positive.
Okay, thank you. Going back to, moving on to the phase one study. You may not be able to answer this question, I'm not sure, but I noticed it was done for Merino Solar by Schooner, and it referenced nearly 5,000 acre phase one study. Was the project a lot bigger then, or has it shrank considerably since Merino asked for that phase one to be done?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I noted on the phase one study, there was no reference to any oil and gas wells in the area. Are there any oil and gas wells in the project footprint?
Not that we know of. We've had someone go and do that research on the project area, specifically in the area that we've proposed for the permit, and they have not found any record of any oil or gas wells in the area, in the project area.
Did you all check on mineral rights versus surface rights?
Yes. So all of the parcels that we have in the project, the mineral rights are owned in fee, meaning they're owned by the landowner. So there haven't been any severed coal or oil and gas rights.
Great. Great to know that. Okay. We'll go back to the karst conversation just for a moment. I did check with our folks here in the Division of Water. just to let you know, the recommended distance, setback from a sinkhole is 50 feet and not 25. So just putting that out there as a matter of information as we move forward here. I know I saw in there where y'all would be consulting with the Division of Water on our groundwater branch for karst features, so just let me know that. Okay, I did notice that y'all had determined that you're going to have about 2 acres of pollinator areas in the project footprint. I don't know if that's still the same or not, given the site plans have changed in terms of the footprint. But I assume there still will be some pollinator areas.
Yes, so as part of our original application, that was one of the mitigations that we proposed, is the 2 acres.
Okay. This is something that I've brought up in a couple previous hearings. Given this area is historically a prairie area, and I would just recommend that Green River Solar contact our Office of Nature Preserves to check with them about pollinator species, because quite frankly, there's better species that you might want to implement there than what you might traditionally get in just a native seed mix that y'all indicated you were going to use. It might be more beneficial to have prairie species there and help us reestablish some of those species in this particular area. Sunny Carr is the executive director. If you want to contact her directly, and that's SUNNI. Just a couple other questions. Have you all completed a wetlands delineation yet on the site? I didn't see a record of one.
I'll defer that question to Brian Bartles. I know we've done quite a bit of work in delineating wetlands. I'm not positive what the latest status is of that, but Brian can certainly answer that.
Okay, and the same question with threatened and endangered species, particularly a Federal Fish and Wildlife IPAC or a Kentucky biological assessment of the site as well. That would be a question for Mr. Bartles.
Yes, I know that's in progress, and Mr. Bartles can provide more background.
Okay, we'll just follow up with him then. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Rowland, do you have any questions?
Yes, just one question, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Ms. Jensen. In the introduction to Exhibit 9 relating to the economic impact of the project, you mentioned that the projects will seek to enter into pilot agreements with both Breckenridge and Meade counties as well as the state. Could you give us an update on whether those negotiations have started and any status that we should be aware of?
As of right now, we have not started those discussions. So we are planning to start those discussions later this year.
Okay. That's the only question for me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Judge Lucas, do you have any questions?
I do, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of brief points I wanted to kind of clarify. But Ms. Jensen, you mentioned that the older home that's going to be raised on Exhibit C 202, is that in Meade County or Breckenridge County? Do you recall?
It's in Meade County.
Is in Meade County?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess a little bit of a concern I've still got. Meade County, on the course of their ordinance, does show 50 foot from boundaries and 250 from any residential or school or so forth. There was a portion of the original plans that were laid within the city limits of Irvington, which I know has been revised. How far is that out of Irvington? How far has that been moved? I didn't check the exhibit closely.
I don't have an exact footage for you, but I know that it's fully outside of the city limits at this time.
The only concern I've got, the setbacks just doesn't seem quite enough to me, a residential. I think on your plans here, it shows there's 230 parcels and there's 142 parcels that are actually residential. And that's a pretty high number, 62% of it. Is the 250, I know that's what Meade County originally passed their ordinance to be, but with that number of parcels in this area we're talking about, the 250 doesn't seem like it's quite far enough to me. I know there's going to be breaks and so forth in there, but again, that seems like a high number of residents that are going to be within maybe 250 or 300 feet of the arrays and so forth. Wonder, the statute, of course, shows 1,000 feet and 2,000 feet, and I know y'all are wanting a deviation from that, which I have no problem with that, but it just seems like 250 seems a little close to me on a resident. That's not really a question, but that's kind of a point of contention. And you also said the decommissioning agreements, they're only between the landowners and Green River. Is that correct?
Right, yep.
Okay. My concern from what I hear from all the people here in the county, the biggest concern, the number one concern has been environmental concerns. And of course you all have made the comment that there is no hazards that can possibly leak into the ground or through the sinkholes and so forth too. That was the biggest concern that I've heard from most of the people here. They're just not 100% sure that the environment is still safe with all these arrays going to be put in and so forth. So, but that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I think everybody's covered most of the questions that I had.
All right, thank you. Mr. Henderson, do you have any questions for Ms. Jensen?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 or 3 questions. My first question has to do, I was going to ask you where the energy will go, and I understand I'm not supposed to ask that question, but I would ask you this. Can you comment on whether this energy will be used to power the new plant that's going in at Brandenburg and Meade County, or will it be going out of state?
Our contract has it going out of state.
Okay.
It's actually public information. It's the contract is with NIPSCO.
Okay. So it'll be going out of state.
Right.
Okay. Well, this project, do you anticipate that this is all the acres you're going to be utilizing in this Irvington area project, or will you be expanding that project into other properties in the future?
We don't currently have any plans to expand the project in the future.
And going along with my judge, I guess I would urge this committee to consider that the rules that are going in effect for Meade County it would seem to me to be appropriate rules that would also be utilized for actually the majority of this project, which is in Breckinridge County. So I would encourage the committee members to consider that. I understand that you're following zoning rules up there, but it would seem to me like those rules are most appropriate. And finally, the landowner agreement. Do I have a copy of that landowner agreement that I missed?
I think if you don't, Mr. Henderson, I guess I'll clarify. Mr. Sanford, that was indicated to be filed under the record. Is that correct, those landowner agreements?
Yes, the landowner agreements were filed on a confidential basis with the siting board, Your Honor.
And those are the documents subject.
You refer me,
Hold on one
Mr.
second.
Sanford, where would I look that up? What would be the specific heading?
Mr. Henderson, hold on one second. Mr. Sanford, is that the outstanding, the documents that are subject to the outstanding motion for confidentiality?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Henderson, we'll work with you to make sure that you have a copy of those if you don't already.
10-4, I appreciate that. And finally, is it your position, because I was going to ask you what specific elements and what levels will there be contamination from this project over the life of the project? And is it your position there will be absolutely no contaminants anytime during the life of this project evolving from these devices you're going to be installing?
The risk of any hazardous materials with these solar panels is very, very low. And when you think about a lot of other potential construction developments that may occur, any development, comes with some risk, and that's why, we are required to file permits with different environmental cabinets. But these solar panels don't represent any increase in that risk due to hazardous materials.
But to my point then, I think you've answered it. You're not saying there's not any contamination, you're saying it's at a low level. Is that correct?
And it wouldn't be due to the panels. It's just kind of a function of any kind of construction or any kind of development.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes my questions.
Okay. Vice Chair Cubbage? Any questions?
Yes, I have questions. Thanks for being here, Ms. Jensen. Does NextEra currently plan to operate the solar farm post-construction?
Yes.
Okay. Does NextEra have any experience constructing solar farms in areas with comparable karst geography to the site here?
So I'll defer that question to Mr. Towery.
Okay. You mentioned that your geotechnical experts had started working on delineating problem areas for karst construction, depressions, sinkholes. Are there any available reports yet for those delineations?
We do have some reports from those geotechnical consultants.
Okay. Has anything surprising come up in those reports, or is everything consistent with what's already been submitted to us?
It's consistent with what's been submitted as far as the delineation and the types of categories.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions about some of the identified limestone quarries, both on what I believe are within the site footprint and adjoining to the footprint. I know there is a historical quarry, I believe, on the Willoughby tract, as it was called, dating back to the 1920s. And there was a notation that that area was going to be avoided for solar panels. Do I have that understanding correct?
I'm not completely clear on that. I know that the land that we have under contract does not have any quarries on it. From my understanding, the land that we have under contract, there may have been some past limestone reservations, but those have expired.
Okay, so you don't know, and it may be that someone else does, you don't know whether any assessment was done of how much had been mined out in this historical quarry that is no longer active.
Correct. I don't have that information.
Okay, do you know who might have that information?
Probably the company that I'm at a loss with that one.
Okay.
Maybe the company that had previously mined it. I think it was all, well, yeah, that's all I really know.
Okay. With respect to the quarry activity on the adjoining parcel, I believe that is either owned or operated by Lighters, which is a limestone operator, pretty well known in the area. Do you know whether you all have done any due diligence with Lighters about where they are currently active within their footprint, if it is right on the boundary, if it's on the other side of their property, if that question makes any sense to you?
That makes sense. We haven't had any contact with them. for this one.
Okay. So you don't know if their mined out area comes right up to the edge of the property under contract?
That's something we would need to investigate.
Okay. Parcel 6 was identified as one with several sinkholes, and I could not tell you anything other than the denominator parcel 6. In response to data request number 4, and this was the one about the karst, you indicated that parcel 6 is currently not included in the proposed project. Is there a chance I can change in the future? Or are you set that parcel 6 will not be part of the project?
I remember looking at this, and I answered that one specifically. So if in the data request we said that it was not included, that means we don't have any future plans to build there.
Okay. I think that is all that I have, and I can ask Mr. Towery and Mr. Bartles those other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Butler, any questions?
Just a slight follow-up from the vice chairs. So if parcel 6 doesn't have anything on it, how is that going to change the size of your plan? Does it change it dramatically?
No, it doesn't change it dramatically.
Can you give us a percentage?
I don't have a percentage off the top of my head. The permit area that we are permitting represents the maximum, disturbance area for the project. And so I don't have a specific percentage.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Ms. Jensen, I have just a few questions. First, I take it from the comment earlier about the pilot payment in lieu of tax agreements that the applicant, you intend to enter into agreements with the county for industrial revenue bonds. Is that correct?
I was kind of breaking up there at the last second. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Does Green River Solar intend on entering into agreements related to industrial revenue bonds with either or both Meade and Breckenridge County?
Yes.
Okay. Both of them or just one of the two counties?
With both of them.
Okay.
Is the current intent.
Okay. And so if you entered into both IRBs with both, your intent would be to enter into pilot agreements with both. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to ask about decommissioning, and I don't want to necessarily cite to or have a deep discussion about the leases that have been filed with the siting board, but I don't think we need to get any more detail than what you've gotten into in a couple of your responses citing those leases. Are all of the leases with Green River Solar or a different entity?
They are with Merino Solar.
Okay.
And then, yep.
So Merino Solar, pursuant to your testimony earlier, pursuant to those leases, has a decommissioning and a decommissioning bond obligation. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so that decommissioning obligation runs with Merino Solar. Well, let me ask it this way. I don't want to ask for a legal opinion. Mr. Sanford's probably got his finger on his cursor right now. Let me ask you this way: do you know whether Green River Solar is a signatory at all to those lease agreements?
Green River Solar isn't on the signature pages, but we have purchased and owned. Green River Solar purchased and owns 100% interest in Merino Solar.
So is it like a member managed LLC and Green River Solar is the only member, something like that?
Right.
Okay.
I think, I am
I mean,
not,
that's-
I'm not a.
Yeah, I'm not asking for the legal distinction, but
It's a
what you're
one-to-one
saying,
relationship.
I just want to make sure you're saying that Green River Solar is under complete control, direct or indirect, of Merino. Is that correct?
Well, the other way around. So Merino Solar is fully controlled and owned by Green River Solar.
Okay. So the decommissioning obligations and the decommissioning bonding obligations are with Merino Solar as it relates to those land use agreements or those leases. My question is Merino Solar or Green River Solar LLC the permit holder or the applicant for planning and zoning in Meade County?
It's Green River Solar.
Okay. So is it your understanding that Green River Solar will be the entity with the decommissioning obligation under the Meade County process?
That's correct.
Okay. And so will you all have to bond for that decommissioning obligation to Meade County?
Correct.
Okay. So do you know whether it's the applicant's plan to have Green River Solar effectively on the hook for decommissioning as it relates to the county, but Merino Solar to be on the hook for decommissioning as it relates to the leases?
Yeah, I'd probably have to talk to our legal counsel and our corporate governance team about how that works, and how that would play out.
Yeah, Your Honor, if I may be able to help clarify a little bit. And probably the best thing would be perhaps a post-hearing data request on this. But I think part of the confusion is that the project was purchased from Merino Solar, which was formerly owned by the original developer of the project. And so there are two different corporate entities, but as part of this process, that will all come together. I think it would probably be better than speculating on the witness stand on how that'll happen, maybe to just address that in the form of a post-hearing data request, if that'd be appropriate.
Yeah, and I appreciate the concern, Mr. Sanford. The issue with the post-hearing data request is if I have subsequent, I get an answer and it takes at least 3 or 4 days to get another question back out in order to follow up on the answer that's received. I just want to make sure that I'm clear here that the applicant for a certificate here is not the entity that has the control of the land, and that the leases, well, the leases deal with Merino, and so I guess we will have to ask a significant amount of post-hearing discovery on this, just because I guess I'm not asking you to testify, Mr. Sanford, but I'm curious by what you mean, and we'll find a witness that can respond to it in post-hearing data request, what you mean by all sort of work out and pan out in the end, because there are going to be different decommissioning obligations at a minimum under Meade County and the leases, and certainly the other iterations of the siting board have taken decommissioning as a serious consideration when granting a siting certificate. So I'll move on to other question, but I don't think you all should be surprised if you get a significant number of questions on this item. I guess the last question is, do you have personal knowledge of whether there's a plan, personal knowledge of a set plan or preferred plan to assign the leases that Merino currently has to Green River Solar?
Not at this time. I'm not clear on what exactly the plan will be.
Okay. One thing I'll ask, a couple people have asked about this earlier, the setbacks, the Meade County setback, as I understand it, I'm looking here, at a single page printout of the SES ordinance that Meade County has, is that the setbacks for level 3 SES, which as I understand includes this project, I think it's projects encompassing something like more than a half an acre of solar installations, that the setbacks are 50 feet from the perimeter of property lines of the project area and at least 250 feet from any residential structure, nursing home, church, or school, and that interconnection facilities may be located within the setback lines. Is that your understanding, Ms. Jensen?
Yes,
All right, and those are the distances proposed, for Breckenridge County as well, is that correct?
that's correct.
All right, so it's required by law in Meade, but as a sort of proposed mitigation, by the applicant, proposed mitigation standard, you would agree to abide by at least this small section here, as it relates to Breckenridge County, is that right?
The setback requirements, yes.
Okay. So, you were asked earlier about this, interconnection facilities may be located within the setback lines. Are you aware of the distance between the proposed substation and the nearest residential structure?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay. Do you have copies of the filing that was made on September the 23rd in this case?
Okay,
And those were, I think, the responses to staff's second request for information. Would you have those available?
I can bring them up.
All right, take your time.
Okay, yep,
All right, and on page 14 of those responses is a map that includes, it's bifurcated by Kentucky Highway 79, the map is, and it shows the Big River substation in the middle of the picture, and then the proposed, what I take as the proposed substation, the Green River Solar Substation. Do you see that?
yes,
And the, from at least the way this map is shown, the Green River Solar Substation is directly below the Big River Substation. Is that correct?
correct.
And it's
Yeah,
on-
just on the southwest.
They're on Kentucky Highway 79, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the home or the residential structure that sits at the corner of, I guess, Guston Road and Highway 79 is shown with the 250-foot buffer. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then that dotted buffer, it's sort of clustered with a number of other residential structures, right? So instead of being individual circles, it sort of continues on to the left around other residential structures. Is that right?
Right,
Okay. And it goes there behind the Big Rivers substation and then over all the way over here to this Timothy Kendall plot, correct?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
So where the substation is, across the road is a residential structure. Do you see that?
yes.
Or a structure. Let me just be clear. A
Big
structure.
structure, I'm not, yeah,
Yeah, it's not clear from the map whether it's a residential structure. So as a post-hearing data request, I would just like if you could identify whether that structure on Highway 79 on page 14 of 35 of these DRs is residential in nature, and if so, the proposed distance between that home and the expected substation equipment.
okay,
Okay.
Yep.
And then in addition to that, there are homes, or there's at least one residential, I guess I'd say the closest residential structure identified on this page is, I guess, directly to the left almost of that Big River substation. Do you see that? The one that the 250-foot proposed boundary goes around there?
Yes.
My question would be what the distance between that residence, my second question would be that residence and the proposed substation equipment. What's the distance? Now, the other question I have about this, and if you're not the right person to ask, that's fine, is there any expectation that additional conductoring for any of the Big Rivers lines, including this substation or the lines that come to or from the substation, will be required as a result of this project?
That's something that we'll need to work out with Big Rivers. I don't have the specific details right now. Potentially a question for Mr. Towery.
Okay, so we don't know, like, for instance, if there's a current lattice tower that's set up to be double circuit and it's only single circuit, and there's a home on the side that doesn't have conductoring, that if it's going to now have to be a double circuit, that, the conductoring is going to be, well, let's just say 30 feet closer to the home. You don't know any of that information yet?
What we do know is, as part of the transmission process and interconnection into the main grid, MISO will work with Big Rivers to determine any upgrades required or any scope required for the project to tie in. And so that scope has been defined. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know that work is ongoing.
Is Green River Solar's QID number included in the record of this case?
I believe it is. I believe it was part of the original filing.
And part of the application?
Right.
Okay. I'd like to continue on to page 16 of that same document with the map. And ask about the cemetery that's in the very middle of the page. Do you know where I'm talking to? Do you see what I'm referring to on that document?
Yes.
All right. Do you have any personal knowledge of the cemetery? I mean, are you aware that the cemetery exists on this plot of land?
Yes.
Okay. So, is there current access into and from that cemetery, public access?
Right now, there's no public access to that.
Okay. And how is it accessible?
It's just accessible through the landowner's fences. Yeah,
Okay. And
they have fencing surrounding the whole area.
all right. And so they have a fence around the small area of the cemetery, is that correct?
I think they have a fence around a portion of that. It's wooded, so they've left the existing vegetation there.
Okay. So is there a private road that goes to the cemetery?
No.
Okay. So let me ask this question. Is that landowner able to, as proposed in this project, is that landowner able to access that cemetery?
Not, well, I mean, the way the permit plans are, they would be able to access it, requesting access from the operators.
They would have to ask Green River Solar to unlock the gate and go with them to visit the property. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And can you go on to page 19 of that document? And let me know when you're there.
Yep.
So do you see the let's call it in the top left corner. It's not all the way up, but there's a text box that states collection line along access road. Do you see that?
Correct, yep, I see it.
Do you see the home with the 250-foot buffer around it directly to the right and above that text box?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious about vegetative buffering for that. That parcel seems to effectively have only a handful of trees around the home, but there's no proposed vegetative buffering for any of the solar facilities directly above and to the right of that facility. Is that by design?
No, that's something that's a correction that we can make.
Okay, and there were a couple in here that were that way where you could sort of tell from the visual that there's no current vegetation between the proposed solar arrays and the residences, and there's no proposed vegetation between those. And I guess I would ask, in terms of vegetative buffers, is this the most up-to-date plan, these responses to data requests that Green River Solar has?
As part of the Meade County application, we may have made some adjustments as part of that submittal that we can send over to the CSC.
Okay. Well, and the perfect example, I had one other that I wanted to sort of note. On page 25, I wrote it down as being the Lucas track. Yeah, if you go to page 25, the very top track towards the left-hand side of the page looks like to be the Donnie and Stacy Lucas. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you see it, that there appears to be very little existing vegetation, but there are panels exactly 250 feet to the left and 250 feet to the right to the home of their home.
Yes, I can see that.
But there's no proposed vegetative buffering, is that right?
Right. Yeah, that
Okay.
seems to be a correction as well.
Okay.
In need of a correction.
And then I think there's an additional one on page 27. There's the Christopher and Elizabeth Squires, seems to be a home up on a hill that overlooks probably about 400 feet away an entire field of solar arrays with no proposed and no existing vegetative buffering. And then there's a home, it's not identified which home, there's a home along Webster Basin Springs Road on page 29 of that doesn't appear to have any current vegetative buffering or proposed vegetative buffering in the middle of the page. So I'll ask as a post-hearing data request for the applicant's proposed, I guess if we can, as detailed as possible, proposed assessment map with what the proposed actual vegetative buffers are. If the applicant would like to, identify on here that they believe there's current vegetative buffers, they can do so in the legend, but it does appear that there are a few on here that would be within direct eyesight and that don't provide any vegetative buffer. If there's a reason for that, a narrative response would be, I guess, fine if you prefer to do that. My only other question, Ms. Jensen, is around the setbacks. Does the applicant propose any additional or different setbacks for participating landowners, different than those of non-participating landowners?
Not at this time.
Okay. And then don't ever trust an attorney when they say last question. This is the last question. There is a school in fairly close proximity to the proposed site, or at least my definition, fairly close proximity. Have you worked, and I'm sure there are some churches in the area, I think, have you all worked on determining specific construction schedules that might interfere with the services that those types of entities provide?
can you repeat the question?
Yeah, for things like schools and churches, where, concert, where you might want to pay attention, or, be able to make sure you hear things all the time. Have you all proposed any specific construction schedules to work around those specific types of entities or buildings?
We have not.
Okay. All right, those are all the questions I have, Mr. Sanford. Do you have any redirect for Ms. Jensen?
I do not, Your Honor.
Okay. And I would ask Ms. Jensen, since you seem to be the one that knows the most about this project, I always risk letting the most knowledgeable person go for the day and then somebody else defer a question back to them. So I'm happy for you to step down as it may be from the witness stand, but I'd love if you'd stick around to the end of the hearing.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll be around.
All right, Mr. Sanford, we've been going at it now for about an hour and a half. I'd like to take about let's call it a 13-minute recess until 3:20 Eastern.
Thank you.
Hope Anthony can hear and unmute us. He still hasn't turned the mic off yet. There we go. All right. We're back on the record in case number 2020-00387. Mr. Sanford, do you have any additional witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to next call Mr. Brian Bartles, please.
Mr. Bartles, trying to look for you here. There we are. Please turn on your microphone, video, and please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under the penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Brian Bartles, address 700 Universe Boulevard, Juno Beach, Florida, 33408.
All right, Mr. Sanford, you may ask.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Bartles. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, David.
Let's start out, if you don't mind, maybe just begin by telling me what your title is and sort of what your job is in relation to this particular project.
Sure. So I am an environmental specialist. That's my title. And I assist with the environmental siting and permitting of the solar facilities within my assigned region, including Green River Solar.
Okay. And were you involved in some of the preparations of the responses to data requests in this case?
Yes.
And do you have any additions or corrections or changes to the responses that were provided in those responses to data requests?
No.
If I were to ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Is it your desire and intent to have those responses to data requests incorporated into the record of this hearing?
Yes.
And do you happen to have any materials that you have with you there as you prepare to testify?
I have some of the reports that were submitted as a part of the filing.
Okay. So let's talk about that just for a second, maybe to give a little clarity. What field surveys or reports have already been completed and prepared with regard to this project?
So we've completed a host of environmental field surveys, including a wetland delineation, bat habitat assessment, a cave portal survey, and a phase 1 archaeological survey.
Okay. And are there any field surveys or project reports that are still yet to be completed?
Yes, so those studies are ongoing as we continue to optimize the site. So there's potential for new areas to be included, and therefore we need to be surveyed.
Okay. What are the projects that are still ongoing, the surveys?
Additional areas would require us to perform a wetland delineation and a bat habitat assessment, and potentially a cultural resources survey, depending on any jurisdictional features that may be present.
Okay, great. With that, Your Honor, I will tender this witness for cross-examination.
Ms. Fell?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Any of the completed environmental surveys that you just mentioned, have those been filed on the record in the case?
I'm not sure if they've been completed at this time. I think a lot of those reports are still subject to change.
Okay, are you aware of whether any of the environmental surveys have been fully finalized at this point?
Not completely finalized, no, until all the remaining parcels have been properly vetted.
Okay, thank you. I assume you were present for Ms. Jensen's testimony earlier?
Yes.
Okay, and you heard there were many questions deferred to Mr. Towery. Were there any of those that you heard that would be more along your area of expertise than Mr. Towery's regarding any of the karst topography or anything of that nature?
Well, I will add that, a lot of the sinkholes and other stormwater erosion controls will be covered under our Kentucky Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit issued by the Division of Water, and that will include a stormwater pollution prevention plan and best management practices such as buffer zone and silt fencing, which will be placed around some of the higher risk karst features.
Okay, just on a very higher level, can you describe for the siting board what that pollution protection plan would detail?
It's the stormwater pollution prevention plan. Is that correct?
Yes, when you mentioned the pollution protection plan. Like I said, just on a very broad explanation, can you give us what that actually entails?
Sure. And we base it off of guidance provided by the Division of Water and how to prepare it's shorthanded SWIP, SWPPP. And basically it involves a description of the different sensitive resources on site, such as sinkholes or different water features, and their relation to the project infrastructure and ground disturbance. And there are engineering calculations that are involved with the SWIP to determine the direction and the rate of stormwater flow from the construction site. And so there's also the best management practices that we would use during construction are also detailed within the SWIP.
Okay, thank you. And you'd also mentioned a little bit about the resources that would be on the site and discuss a little bit about silt fences. And Green River Solar has stated in its application that silt fences, sediment basins, sediment traps, or buffer zones would be deployed around sensitive resources. Can you give just a very brief explanation of those options and what your opinion is and what would be the best method or best option here that would be deployed around those sensitive resources?
I think the silt fencing and the sedimentation basins and the buffer zones are probably the primary practices that we would use on site during construction. Typically that's decided on by our E&C, engineering construction personnel, in coordination with our engineering procurement contractor. So I would have to defer to them as far as what the best stormwater best management practice would be on site.
Okay. Can you just give a very brief description for the board, the siting board, what the silt fences actually, how they're provided there, what that entails?
So it's a short, finely meshed fence that basically traps any sort of stormwater erosion or pollutants that come from construction and prevent them from being deposited within any of the sensitive natural resources such as wetlands or sinkholes.
And are those left there even after the construction is complete?
Those are typically removed after construction, after active disturbance has been concluded.
I think that's all the questions staff have for Mr. Bartles at this time.
Deputy Secretary, do you have any questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of follow-ups. Mr. Bartles, do you anticipate that there'll be jurisdictional wetlands and or streams in the project footprint?
Yes, we received an approved jurisdictional determination from the Corps in March of this year, and they indicated that there were several jurisdictional features on site.
Okay. Do you know about any potential project disturbance of any of those, or is that a better question for Mr. Towery?
at this time, we do not intend on impacting any jurisdictional features.
Okay. Since you mentioned Cave Portal, and this is a karst area, has there been any identified hibernaculums on the property? Bat hibernaculum?
I don't believe any bat hibernacula were identified within the project. We had conducted a portal survey, a cave and portal survey, and those results were sent to the Fish and Wildlife Service for their concurrence, and they did not anticipate any impacts to bat hibernacula based on the data we provided them.
Okay. What about summer roosting? I'm not really that familiar with the property in terms of large trees or roost trees. Is that the case?
There is suitable bat habitat within the project boundary, including suitable roosting habitat for the Indiana bat.
Would those areas be disturbed?
Those areas would likely be disturbed, yes. And, our intention is to limit that disturbance to the bat inactive season from November to March.
Right. Final question. As far as archaeological survey, will there be involvement will there be jurisdictional areas where the Kentucky SHPO would have to be consulted?
At this time, we don't anticipate coordination with the Kentucky SHPO. There is no federal nexus associated with the projects, so there's no coordination required.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rowland, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Lucas, do you have any questions?
Not really. I just want to comment to Mr. Bartles. Thank you for being here. But during the archaeological survey and also environmental survey, you're saying all 8 of the sections, they were approved. There was nothing found that was of any concern on any of those 8 sections that we're talking about?
We did not have a formal review by the SHPO for our archaeological results, if that was the question you're asking.
Well, basically that's it. I know with any concerns that we've had some projects here in the county that we've had to have SHPO to pass. So you're saying that SHPO shouldn't be involved in this approvals and so forth?
That's correct. There is no regulatory hook for them to review our project.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Henderson, any questions, Mr. Bartles?
Yes, sir. As the environmental expert, how will you deal with new sinkholes that pop up on this property during the life of the project?
So I think that's a question probably best for Mr. Towery, but depending on the whether it's a high risk karst feature, we would try to limit any impact to that feature to the greatest extent practicable.
And how would you deal with noxious weeds? We've got a plane here called Johnson grass, and we've worked with the state as farmers to be able to control that. How will you deal with your fence line and the interior of the property to control that noxious weed and other noxious weeds?
So, typically during construction, we are on the lookout for any sort of noxious weeds that may be present that would take advantage of the fresh disturbed soil on site. And typically, depending on the practice, they're either hand removed or it's spot treated with an herbicide.
And finally, I've heard some of these projects and seen some public information that talked about grazing, such as using goats and sheep and that kind of an animal to graze underneath these panels. but that won't be a possibility, will it?
We don't anticipate any grazing animals being utilized on site.
Thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I thought we might get a good recommendation from Mr. Bartles on how to control Johnson grass maybe someday. Vice Chair Cubbage, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a few follow-ups. Good afternoon, Mr. Bartles. You had mentioned that there at least were in process a cave and portal survey, an archaeological survey, a bat habitat assessment, and a wetland and streams of the United States assessment. But you indicated those were not in final yet because you haven't assessed all of the remaining parcels. I want to try to get some clarity on what that means. Is it that within the current footprint, everything hasn't been assessed, or you're waiting for a final site plan?
My understanding is that it would be more the latter, as we, we've reviewed them from a high level perspective, but not boots on the ground surveying.
Okay, and by not boots on the ground, I guess so for instance, your archaeological survey, has that been what is sometimes called a desk review, but there hasn't been an assessment on the property?
Both have been completed for the project. So there was the desktop review, and that was followed up by an in-person pedestrian survey of the features of the parcels, and in particular of the features that are identified from the desktop review.
Okay, and the cave and portal survey, was that done based on an in-person walk of the property?
Yes.
Okay. Speaking of the cave and portal survey, I don't know if you heard my question to Ms. Jensen about the historical limestone quarry from the 1920s on what is referred in one document to the Willoughby Tract. Did you find any evidence of that during your cave and portal survey?
I am not familiar with that being identified during the cave and portal survey.
Okay. Did you find, and you may not have the answer to this, and if so, that's fine. Did you find any instances of subsidence or disturbance along the property line where the active limestone quarry is located?
I'm not aware of any disturbances.
Okay. I believe that is all the questions I've got. Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Butler?
No, my questions have been asked. Thank you.
Mr. Sanford, do you have any redirect to Mr. Bartles?
I do not, Your Honor.
All right. And Ms. Fell, is there any reason that Mr. Bartles can't be excused for the remainder of the hearing? Okay. All right. Thank you very much for being here with us today, Mr. Bartles. You may be excused.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Sanford, would you like to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Mr. Matthew Towery, please.
All right, Mr. Towery, please raise your right hand, turn on your camera and microphone. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Matt Towery, 700 Universe Boulevard, Juno Beach, Florida, 33408.
All right. Mr. Sanford, you may ask.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Towery. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So if you don't mind, go ahead and state your title for the record, and then also explain a little bit about your expertise and experience with the project.
Yes, so I work in our engineering and construction group as a project manager. So we oversee the design and procurement of the facility, as well as contracting with an EPC and working with environmental and development team.
Okay. And did you cause certain responses to data requests to be filed in the record of this case?
Yes.
Do you have any corrections or changes or edits to the responses that you previously provided?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Is it your desire and intent to incorporate those responses into the record of this proceeding?
Yes.
Let me ask you the same question that I asked Mr. Bartles a few minutes ago. Would you please provide a list of the surveys or inspections that have been performed that are within your purview with regard to this project so far?
Yes, so on site, we've conducted several phases of geotech, including borings, test pits, and other soil samples that drive the design of the project. In addition, we've conducted initially a desktop review in terms of karst, using a geotech consultant familiar with Kentucky, and as well as Ms. Jensen mentioned, boots on the ground surveys of every feature that we currently have under our site plan in terms of ranking karst features.
Okay, and are there any such surveys or inspections that are currently pending or that have yet to be initiated?
There is another phase, which is the definition is geophysical surveys, which is more related to like ground penetrating radar, where you penetrate the ground to see other voids or other karst features that are not present at the surface that were not captured in the original karst investigation.
Okay, and approximately when would that phase kick off?
That would likely kick off end of this year, early next year.
Okay, thank you for that. With that, Your Honor, I'll tender this witness for further cross-examination.
All right, Ms. Feld, do you have questions for Mr. Towery?
Yes, just some follow-ups, Mr. Towery. Quickly, you had just mentioned that there are some studies that have already been performed. One was regarding the soil samples that drive the design, and as well as both the desktop review and boots on the ground, as you described it, review of the karst features by a geotech consultant. Are there reports that have been generated as a result of those studies?
There are.
Okay, just ask counsel as post-hearing data request to provide any of those reports that have been prepared by Green River Solar's geotechnical consultants. Also, there's been many questions referred to you, so hang in there with us. We'll get through there as quickly as we can. But firstly, there's an alternative racking system presented by Green River Solar, in this case referred to as ground mounting. Can you detail a little bit for the siting board how that would work and whether that is a viable option given the presence of karst?
Yeah, so a ballast system is probably more relatable to rooftop solar, like you may see on a Walmart or houses, but they're not actually drilling 10, 15 feet into the ground. So there's still some optimization and design work to be done to decide what areas that ballast system would work better at. But what it avoids in a traditional system is having to, as I mentioned before, drive piles 10 to 15 feet into the ground. So it rests more on the surface of the natural grade. And, as I mentioned, still more design optimizations to look at and complete the rest of our geotech.
Would that method produce any potential concerns with the lower clearance from the ground as far as any flooding concerns or maintenance of vegetation below it?
In terms of flooding, I do not believe so. I think vegetation management would probably have to another thing to be able to look at in that optimization, whether we stick with a more traditional system or a ground mount system. I have not personally installed those systems like that here, so we're still working through that with our engineering team.
Green River Solar has also stated that it might remediate or build over low-risk sinkholes using a method such as a reverse grade filter. Can you explain this process for the siting board, as well as any additional risk that might create?
The reverse grade filter was recommended by our geotech consultant. There are other methods, but the objective is to keep that runoff during a storm event or rain event that has contact with the below aquifer, that it filters it and we're not, the sinkhole's not being clogged or stopped up. And there's a lot of the the lower risk sinkholes they're more just depressions in the earth where you wouldn't have to dig that deep to install that reverse grade filter.
So would there actually be, I mean, sounds like more so, as you've just said, it would be applicable to these depressions, not to the actual existing open sinkholes, is that right?
That is correct in our geotech consultant's recommendation when we label moderate or high risk or what they call open throat sinkholes that based on their experience in the area, we would avoid
Well,
regardless. And B, it's sorry.
As you've already mentioned a little bit about, traditional pile driving, that installation, Green River Solar has stated that instead it might employ pre-drilling and grouting pile with hard clay or limestone bed. And again, that this also would not occur in those high-risk areas where collapse might occur. Can you give a very brief explanation of how that process would work and any associated risk with that method?
So pre-drilling due to the karst and the harder clays and rock in the area would require drilling essentially a pilot hole and then driving the pile. These are just traditional methods for pile driving. We would, of course, in those high-risk areas have the appropriate setbacks and avoid, clusters of high-risk sinkholes that we've mentioned before from the geotech's report in terms of avoidance.
And are you aware, have you worked on any other solar projects that have had this high concentration of karst?
I have not personally. In our engineering group and construction group, we have consulted other project managers that have experienced it in the southeast area, as well as contacting EPC contractors to get their review of the report and opinion, and kind of work together as a team to continue to optimize the design and what makes the most sense from a design perspective.
Okay. As far as the question I asked Ms. Jensen earlier, wherein I was talking about the siting board typically requires a noise suppression method during construction, such as semi-tractor and canvas method or sound blankets or something comparable to that. Have you had any experience with projects that have used any such type of noise suppression methods?
I have not personally, and we did also consult others in our group. But as Ms. Jensen referred to, a lot of times we'll reach out to nearby landowners and just have that open communication, build that relationship that there will be a temporary noise disturbance, during the hours, a few hours of the day, and work a method that way. None of our EPC contractors or personnel have had experience with the idea around driving a semi truck with a canvas type of suppression to this day.
Sorry, I'm just checking to make sure that's everything I want to ask you, Mr. Towery, and I believe it is all the questions staff had for Mr. Towery at this time.
Deputy Secretary Lyons?
Just one clarifying question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Towery, I'm not asking you to contradict Ms. Jensen on a phrase she used earlier, but wanted to make sure I had it in the right context or whether it is actually applicable to a karst feature. She mentioned a dormant sinkhole. I'm not a geologist, but I'm not quite sure how a sinkhole might be quote unquote dormant. Always has the possibility, I would think, to expand. Is that actually a real thing in your estimation? Or is that kind of synonymous maybe with low risk or what?
I think they're in the report. That's one of the criteria our consultants looked at is, if it's a high risk, how active does it look or nearby the sinkhole? And I don't have the exact details without needing to pull the report up of how they classified that. But there is, I don't want to say exact language around dormant, but something to that similar description from a low risk sinkhole in that report. If
Are
that makes
those,
sense.
yeah, it does, thank you. Are all the sinkholes, depressions, surveyed with ground penetrating radar?
The depressions themselves were not. We talked about several different methods with our consultants, and when it comes down to it, it's easier to have someone who's an expert in the field, very familiar with Kentucky, physically walk up to each one. And based on both, also on the report, criteria around topography, and then knowing that area and K features throughout the site to make that determination of high or low risk. The geophysical survey I mentioned previously was more similar to the ground penetrating radar. It's still to be completed.
Okay, thank you. I think we all have this vision of, like the Corvette Museum, a hole opening up and swallowing, 3 acres of solar array. So probably constitutes all the questions on this. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rowland, do you have any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Lucas, any questions for
Mr.
Towery?
Chairman, I have no questions either.
All right, thank you. Mr. Henderson, any questions for Mr. Towery?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Cubbage?
I can't resist just a few more, particularly on my favorite topic, karst. You mentioned that you have a geotechnical consultant familiar with Kentucky. Who is that consultant?
Their name is Chericon.
Okay.
They have an office based out of Louisville.
And you mentioned that you're planning this ground penetrating radar survey. Was that just a standard thing that your geotech consultant asked to do? Or is that because of some things they found on the site?
Typically, GPR, I'll just use the abbreviation, is not the first thing you go do for a solar site geotech. There are, and I have to pull the report open and actual scope of work. There's other methods similar to that geophysical, but that was their recommendation, is that we could do GPR in certain areas, and some other kind of, I call them probe testing, where you're able to set probes throughout the site, and it kind of mimics the GPR technology to understand voids and things like that.
Okay, and so are they doing a randomized assessment across the site to see if there are voids that aren't obviously visible because of depressions or sinkholes already existing?
I think we would determine that once we have I think some more evaluation around the ballast system and the traditional system of where it would be necessary. Obviously, the areas that are more highly concentrated with high-risk sinkholes, we're avoiding those sinkholes. But I really would rely on their recommendation, knowing that their experience with karst in past projects.
Okay. But I know we've talked, and I know that counsel for the commission for staff has asked the geotech reports that are completed to date to be submitted. Will those explain the criteria for defining what is a low risk or a moderate risk or a high risk sinkhole?
It will, and it goes in great detail around that.
Okay, and will it also explain this reverse grade filter process that they're proposing?
Yes, we have some, it may not be in a formal report, but we have some back and forth with our consultant around proposed remediation scopes and some details and things like that I believe we could share.
Okay, and are they suggesting to do this reverse grade filter process for certain lower risk but existing depressions and sinkholes because they believe the solar panel installation will change some of the runoff on the site and then pose a risk?
I believe part of it is, so obviously the site will have to be graded, and so where these depressions are, we would be doing earthwork in that area anyways. And so remediating that sinkhole, it's part of that's more for constructability as well for the low risk ones. But they have indicated each sinkhole is a little bit different, whether it's low or medium. Obviously the high is we're avoiding, and how you may approach that. So until we get to detailed engineering design, they'll be with us during that design process and making that determination.
Okay. Do you know if anyone has coordinated with the operator of the adjoining limestone quarry regarding mine out areas or where active mining is occurring?
Not to my knowledge, I have not personally had that. But we have not reached out to them.
Okay. Your geotechnical people may want to consider doing that if for no other reason because of the issues. If that is adjoining, sorry, the screen just changed and I was looking at you at one place and you moved. So if I look lost all of a sudden, probably that's all it is. Because of any, either vibration being caused by that or just any additional risk posed, I would highly suggest some coordination with them to figure out just, having known some limestone operators, they want to make the best economic use of their property and they will mine out as far as they possibly can. So it would be a good idea to coordinate with them, whether either directly or asking for reports through an open records request to the Energy and Environment Cabinet, just to see what's going on that adjoining property. And with that, I think that's all I've got. Thank you, Mr. Towery.
Commissioner Butler, any questions?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Sanford, any redirect to Mr. Towery?
No, Your Honor.
Ms. Fell, is there any reason that Mr. Towery can't be excused for the remainder of the hearing?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for being with us, Mr. Towery. You may be excused.
Yep.
Mr. Sanford, do you have any additional witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. We have a couple more. I'd like to call next Mr. Chris Mason, please.
Mr. Mason, please turn on your camera, your microphone, and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Chris Mason, 7208 Falls of Noose Road, Suite 102, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27615.
Mr. Sanford, you may ask.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Mason. How are you today?
Well, thank you.
Good. So let me begin by asking, first off, who is your employer and then what's your job title?
My employer is Environmental Consulting and Technology. I'm a senior manager and project manager, responsible for managing environmental studies associated with this project.
Okay, and so your firm was retained by Green River to assist with the site assessment report that was filed with the application in this proceeding?
That's correct.
Help me out here. You became attached to the project before the application was filed, correct? Or was it shortly thereafter?
I believe shortly afterwards.
Okay, but you're familiar with the contents of the site assessment report?
I am.
Okay, so is there anything in that site assessment report that needs to be updated, edited, changed that you're familiar with?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And is it your desire and intent to have that site assessment report that's filed with the application included in the record of this proceeding?
Yes.
Okay. And then let me also ask, there was an environmental assessment that was also tendered to the Energy and Environment Cabinet that was also attached to this application, correct?
Correct.
And was it your firm that had assisted in the preparation of that?
Yes.
Okay. So with that, Your Honor, I think Mr. Mason's CV has already been filed to establish his bona fides as an expert witness, and I would tender him for cross-examination.
Ms. Fell, do you have any questions for Mr. Mason?
Staff has no questions for Mr. Mason.
Mr. Lyons, do you have any questions for Mr. Mason?
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Rowland?
No questions, Mr.
Judge, do you have any questions for Mr. Mason?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Henderson? Sorry, Mr. Henderson, do you have any questions for Mr. Mason?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Butler?
No questions, thanks.
I have none. I would assume, based on the lack of questions, Mr. Sanford, you're fine with me not giving you the opportunity to redirect. So thank you, Mr. Mason, for being here today, and you may be excused.
All right, thank you.
And Mr. Sanford, I think you have one more witness. You may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We'd like to call Mr. Joshua Crawford, please.
All right, Mr. Crawford, please raise your right hand. Well, before you raise your hand, turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, and please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Joshua Crawford, 235 South 5th Street, Louisville, Kentucky, 40202.
All right, Mr. Sanford, you may ask.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Crawford. If you don't mind, just go ahead and tell us who your employer is and what your job title is.
So I am the executive director of Pegasus Institute. We're a public policy think tank located in Louisville.
And what is your role or connection with this particular project?
So as the executive director of the organization, I oversee all of our research activities, and we have prepared an economic impact report for this project.
Do you have any changes, corrections, or additions to the report that was previously tendered?
I do not.
Do your desire and intent to have that report incorporated into the record of this proceeding?
Yes,
Do you happen to have any materials that are there before you today?
I have a copy of that report.
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, I will tender this witness for cross-examination.
Ms. Fell, do you have any questions for Mr. Crawford?
Staff have no questions for Mr. Crawford.
Deputy Secretary?
No question, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes, just a couple questions. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, Mr. Crawford. I'm trying to get back to the page. Well, I can't find the specific page. I'm still going through your report, but you had estimated that there'd be three. Okay, here it is. Page 13 of your report. 3 long-term operational jobs during the operational phase of the project with an average salary of $80,000 per year. I was just curious how you got that figure, just because that's higher than we've seen in other projects. Is that based off averages on those other projects you referenced in Maryland, North Carolina?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And then in addendum 2, you show some comparisons on the tax revenue generated pre-solar projects versus after solar projects. Do you know if these were actual taxes paid, or if there were pilot agreements for any of these projects?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay. That is all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Judge, do you have any questions for Mr. Crawford?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Henderson, any questions for Mr. Crawford?
I just have one. I just wanted to give the short version of, in light of the fact that we're going to have landowners who are going to receive significant revenues from this, and in the context of the fact that we're going to have revenue loss from crop production, what's going to be the overall impact to Meade and to Breckinridge County of installing these panels at this volume?
Sure. So without knowing the specific usage of the land and the specific crop yields from the land prior, it's impossible to actually give you an exact net number. We have provided a number of averages for Breckinridge and Meade County. I'm happy to go through those. But the long story short, assuming that the crop production on these parcels of land was at or around those averages, there would be a significant economic benefit to the transition to a solar facility.
Do you have any additional questions, Mr. Henderson?
No, sir, I just wanted to get that on the record that, what he just said.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Chair, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Butler?
No questions, thank you.
All right. Mr. Sanford, any redirect to Mr. Crawford?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Crawford. I appreciate you being here today. This is the time I also get to thank Ms. Jensen for being here. You may be excused. We didn't have anybody kick any questions down the road to you. Mr. Sanford, it's my understanding, I've got it somewhere here, that the statutory, given that we had a hearing in this case, that the statutory deadline for an order in this matter is December the 27th. I've got to think I won't be here on none of us will be here on December the 27th, but let me see here. No, it's a Monday. We probably will. We do have, that does provide us a little bit of time in order to conduct post-hearing discovery on this. I suspect, Mr. Sanford, that we can get post-hearing data requests to you by staff's post-hearing data request by the end of the day on Wednesday the 3rd. Would you be able to answer those? Understanding, I think you've heard all of them today, or at least the basis for all of them today. Would you be able to answer those by November the 15th?
Yes, that should be doable, Your Honor.
Okay. We'll put out a procedural schedule, a post-hearing procedural schedule tomorrow that sets the deadline for those is the 15th. As always, Mr. Sanford, if something should occur and you need additional time in order to respond, please file a motion to do so. Given the conversation we had earlier about the leases, certainly the commission will, or the deciding board will reserve its right to ask additional follow-up questions to those post-hearing data requests if additional information is necessary. Other than the single petition for confidentiality, Mr. Sanford, is there any other business that the applicant would like to bring to the citing board's attention before we adjourn today?
No, Your Honor, we appreciate everyone's time and attention today.
All right. Thank you very much. This hearing is adjourned.